Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering woke Hollywood panics, jobs plummet, now facing depression. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Coming from the Los Angeles Times, behind the stunning job losses in Hollywood, the audience has moved on. And why are we talking about a depression here? Well, because around a 20% unemployment rate and a prolonged economic downturn that lasts more than 1 or 2 years is generally considered a depression. At the height of the Great Depression in the United States in 1933, the unemployment rate was 24.9%. And also from the Los Angeles Times, workers feel the pain as a post-streaming wars Hollywood restructures. When they say restructuring, they're restructuring like a bankruptcy restructuring. Huge chunks of Hollywood and Los Angeles' industry for entertainment production is now gone, and it's not coming back. Part of that is because the streaming industry is no longer buying content that it doesn't need. Another part of that is social media sites like YouTube, TikTok, and others are taking away people's attention. But it's beyond the competition from the other platforms, because business and opportunities are down for all of Hollywood content. They're also looking for cheaper ways of producing their production, which does include things like AI. They're working hard at utilizing AI to reduce costs, which also cuts back on jobs. But even more simply, they just do production in the UK, or they do production in Atlanta, or they do production overseas. There are many, many more options than there used to be to produce content, whatever the budget is. And it's destroying Hollywood. From the Los Angeles Times, behind the stunning job losses in Hollywood, the audience has moved on. Now, as you would expect, in this article in the LA Times, they're talking about LA specifically because that's where a lot of people involved in Hollywood live and work. Not just movie stars, regular people, normal people who are working in the industry helping to produce the shows, what they call below the line people. But in addition to that, this affects all of the LA economy. Because when you have a production and you have people working, they utilize local businesses, restaurants, catering, other business services, just getting completely financially hammered right now because of the lack of work in Hollywood. But what you won't see them admit is that if they would just produce the kinds of things that people want to see, they probably would do more than fine, even with some higher cost structures working out of LA. From Breitbart, normal people movie Bad Boys Ride or Die overperforms at the box office. Ride or Die actually did more money than they expected it would do at the box office. It may not make tons and tons of money, but it will probably make more than enough money to have been worth it to make the movie. Because they're making a mainstream movie that isn't focused on propaganda. It's such an unusual thing for them to make. Of course, if they would just go back to trying to focus on what they could do in a profitable way that people would want to see, and judge what content they produce based on audience reactions, they wouldn't be in nearly as much trouble as they're in. They'd still be in severe trouble because even AI alone could completely change this industry. But at least they'd have a product people wanted to see. For example, I just saw The Incredibles 2 last night. Yes, it came out in 2018. I watched it again. Incredibles 2 did $1.2 billion worldwide in box office. That's a huge moneymaker. They did that on a budget of $200 million. The movie was incredibly well done, very tight, very well structured, very well produced. Original ideas within the superhero genre, family ideas, action, compelling, interesting, surprises, a very satisfying, well done product. At the same time, they did feature themes that were a little woke. They had the female, the wife of the superhero, doing most of the heroic action in the movie. It was focused around her and her sensible female ways. Well, yeah, that's a woke concept, especially because that wasn't the basis of the franchise. If they would have just stayed that far and put their message inside a well-done production, they would have done okay. And The Incredibles 2 did do okay. It did more than okay. Supposedly they're working on a sequel now. God only knows what they're going to do with that version of The Incredibles. It probably will not do as well as Incredibles 2. $1.2 billion on a $200 million budget. Incredibles 1, the first movie, did $631 million worldwide, half the business, on a budget of $92 million. So it's not like the franchise was damaged. People were happy enough with what they saw. when they saw Incredibles 2 to make it a tremendous hit. And again, I might not agree with all the messaging in it, especially because it's off-brand from where the first movie was, but it's close enough and it was well done. It was enjoyable. That's as far as Hollywood should go, and then they'd actually still be able to continue to make content. From the LA Times, behind the stunning job losses in Hollywood, the audience has moved on. The iron fist of history seems to finally be coming for Tinseltown. Beyond the financial blows inflicted by the pandemic and the actors and writers' strikes, the vast Los Angeles-based entertainment industry known as Hollywood is facing the far greater forces of economic disruption that have already struck the rest of the United States. Much like manufacturing, agriculture, and other major segments of the U.S. economy before it, the result for Hollywood appears to be mixed: a possible return to prosperity and good times for some, even tighter times for other times. Quote, there's something of an existential question mark over large swaths of the traditional Hollywood economy, said Stuart Ford, chairman and chief executive of Los Angeles-based ACG Studios, which develops, produces, finances, and licenses films and television series. The decades-long way of making money in the film and TV industry has been turned upside down by new technologies, changing public appetites, and the globalization of the workforce. Quote, the key thing here is that you have so many of these things happening at once that it's really hard for anybody to feel confident, said Kevin Clouden, an economics expert at the Milken Institute, who has done extensive research on California's entertainment industry. Quote, there's a very, very real question right now on the business side that's playing out, because nobody's quite sure of the economics. What is clear is that the numbers are bleak for box office receipts, filming activity, and especially employment. Coming out of the strikes in the fall, many expected a rebound in local film and TV jobs, but employment in LA County's motion pictures and sound recording industries, the main category for film and television production, has barely budged from about 100,000 through April, which is about 20% less than pre-pandemic levels. Aside from the early months of COVID-19 in 2020 and the strikes in the summer of last year, employment in the sector hasn't been this low in more than 30 years, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. When you go back and think about content production 30 years ago, going back to the 1990s, when renting videotapes was the hot thing, and there were very few cable channels even available compared to what they have now. There were so few distribution platforms, of course there was no streaming. Why would content production be high when you have no distribution outlets compared to what they have now? It wasn't high, it was very low, and that's where it's at now. The effect on lost wages and purchasing power is significant for the regional economy. Employees in the motion pictures and sound recording industries earned an average of $2,600 a week last year, making up in total about 5% of LA County's wages in the private sector, although less than 3% of employment. And there are tens of thousands more people in Southern California who work for Hollywood as freelancers and contractors but aren't counted in government payroll data. Taken together, they make up the biggest concentration of entertainment industry workers in the world and are part of the explanation of why California's overall labor market is lagging behind the nation's. What's disrupting the future for entertainment industry workers is much like what began convulsing U.S. manufacturing decades ago. New technology that has transformed the business and reduced the need for workers, as well as the rise of cheaper production sites elsewhere in the U.S. and abroad. Even before the strikes, studios had already dramatically cut back on spending on new shows after the so-called streaming wars, when companies lavished huge amounts of money on direct-to-digital content to compete with Netflix. And much of that extra content nobody even watched. If people were really interested in it and they were watching it, they would still be making those shows. Streaming services could say, hey, we have all these new shows, and that would supposedly get subscribers. It didn't even work. But now the game is over, the billions have been lost, and people are out of work. Globally, film and TV production lagged by about 7% in the first quarter of 2024 compared with the same period in 2023, which was already down, according to tracking company ProdPro. Los Angeles probably will remain a thriving center for those who work at the top of the film and TV industry, but much of the production and distribution may continue to move elsewhere, because the people at the top are part of a network at the top. They give each other jobs, they take care of each other, they're not going anywhere. People who have power protect themselves and each other. The people who don't have the power get replaced by the lowest common denominator, the lowest cost they can find. Toronto, for example, has long been an attractive alternative location for shooting movies, while the streets of New York are widely used for television. In recent years, a host of other locations, including Atlanta, have begun cutting into LA's share of the business. In fact, outside of LA, the film and TV industry's payrolls nationally have largely recovered, reflecting in part California's high costs and the long-term outflow of production to other locales, including Atlanta, Vancouver, and London. California's share of U.S. employment in motion pictures and sound recording is now down to less than 30% from almost 40% a decade ago. So more business is being done, and California's getting less of it. The economic ripple effects are being felt across the region, including by prop manufacturers, design studios, talent agencies, and scores of caterers and ancillary businesses serving Hollywood. "Quote, I feel like I'm starting my business all over again," said Ryan Johnson, president of New Rule FX, a special effects prop maker in Van Nuys who had been in the industry since the early 1990s. With demand slacking for such products as fake blood, rubber glass, and breakaway furniture, Johnson said he had to tap all his loan and credit lines on multiple occasions to pay his 7 employees. Some so-called below-the-line crew members, that includes boom operators, costume designers, and camera operators, are going back to school and rewriting their resumes to try their luck in different fields such as manufacturing, engineering, and business services. The world also looks topsy-turvy in the offices of studio executives and for the so-called showrunners who call the shots on television series. Amid waves of consolidation and reorganization, partly in reaction to the rise of Netflix, YouTube, TikTok, and other internet video platforms, legacy film studios are all asking the same question. What can we do to win back today's audience, and how can we make money when the old business model has failed? Of course, they could just make movies people want to see. I know that's an extreme idea, but there are people that want to see regular movies for normal people. Even if you mix in some of your agenda in the movie, that's okay. People will put up with it. It just has to be well structured. It has to make sense. And occasionally you could have a male hero that people could look up to and respect. That would actually help. On top of budget pressures of much higher borrowing costs because interest rates are so astronomically high, the traditional way of doing gap financing, which involves borrowing against future revenue from unsold distribution rights, a longtime part of the independent film and TV model, is now prohibitively expensive, said Ford of AGC Studios. Private equity partners and even once enamored Chinese investors, all previously drawn by the limelight of the entertainment industry, have become scarce. And nobody seems sure about the long-term viability of Hollywood's bread and butter, the feature film made for the big screen. Nothing comes close to the breadth and the depth of the industry's economic crisis today, except what happened in the early 1950s, another period of technological upheaval when television became ubiquitous in American homes. Television hit as federal antitrust laws broke up studios' control over theaters. Because studios used to have the control of producing the movies and then distributing the movies in their own theaters. That got broken up in the 1950s. By the end of that decade, movie attendance had fallen by more than half from its peak in 1948, when some 90 million Americans, about 2/3 of the population, went to the movies every week, according to author Edward J. Epstein in his book The Hollywood Economist. In that crisis, Hollywood reinvented its business model. It began producing television programs, and that opened up a whole new way of making money, producing made-for-TV movies and selling rights to reruns, merchandise, and of course feature films to networks with distribution to foreign markets as well. In later years, sales of videotapes and DVDs, as well as licensing deals with cable TV, ensured a steady flow of residual revenues for studios and key creators and actors. But what's different this time is that the threat is coming from multiple fronts. The extraordinary back-to-back strikes in the summer last year virtually halted production and caused long-lasting disruption to shooting schedules this year and next year. At the same time, the popularity of streaming led by Netflix has cut into not only theater attendance and DVD sales, but also licensing and reselling revenues that studios long enjoyed. Disney, Paramount, and others have joined the streaming bandwagon. Not so easy when many cancel after watching the particular programs that drew them in. Analysts have no doubt that traditional studios are still capable of making great movies. The question is whether the public remains interested in watching a 2.5-hour feature film inside a theater. And of course, if it's a great movie, people will go see it. If it's propaganda nonsense, people will not go see it. That's what movies have come to at this point. Over the last 15 years, Hollywood rode the superhero genre with movies such as Spider-Man and the Avengers films, but that run appears to be on its last legs. The reaction to last year's twin blockbusters, Barbie and Oppenheimer, essentially papered over the industry's core challenge of exciting the public at the box office. Quote, the very basis of what made Hollywood universally popular in the 20th century was the theatrical film. That seems to be ending now, Kuntz said. It seems the audience has moved on to other things. It's actually that Hollywood has moved on to other things. We all know that. Charlie Fink, a former Disney executive who teaches at Chapman University, chalks up the malaise to the fact that people have other things to do with their screens. They prefer to spend time on YouTube and play video games on their phones. That's the problem for Hollywood. As U.S. movie attendance has foundered, the international market has grown even more important, but U.S. producers are facing more competition from South Korea, India, and other countries producing what's popular with their audiences at home and beyond. Nor can major U.S. studios count on the big China market as they had once hoped. Beijing still maintains a strict limit on foreign film showings. Many Chinese are downloading pirated versions of even first-run U.S. movies. And dreams of U.S.-China co-production basically died with the flop of The Great Wall in 2016, said Stanley Rosen, an expert on Chinese film and politics at USC. Quote, "It would be great if they had China," he said, "but you can't really rely on China." With production and budgets scaled back, film and TV producers are opting for cheaper places to shoot. Wages matter, of course, but while producers and directors in LA on average earn 40% more than those in Atlanta, for example, when it comes to crews, the difference is only about 10% for sound engineers, camera operators, and lighting technicians. Where there is a bigger gap is in government support for filming. These are cash subsidies that are paid to the studios to produce in those locations. Georgia has no cap on tax credit incentives, which also cover actors' salaries. Nor does the United Kingdom. And New York state lawmakers last year sharply boosted the annual film tax credit allocation to $700 million, double California's today. In most shooting locations outside LA, the entertainment employment base can still be a limiting factor on production. That's why people from Southern California are often brought in to supplement and lead local projects, said the Millikan Institute's Clouden. But not so much these days. If the productions are cut back and budgets are trimmed, a major place to see those cuts is in not employing the workers from outside of state who need their travel costs covered. So they're not going to fly people in from California to Georgia or from California to New York or wherever else they're going to do the production, because they've got higher travel costs. They don't need to do that. They'll hire local people instead. What worries experts is that as local film industry workers continue to struggle, many will leave that area or quit the business outright because it's so expensive to build a career and live in Los Angeles. Employers such as Johnson at New Rule FX, the prop manufacturer in the Valley, said that after the pandemic waned and business rebounded, many of his employees left the LA area due to the high cost of living. For all the current challenges, one huge advantage that no place has been able to replicate is the vast pool of creative and technical capabilities and infrastructure built up over a century in Los Angeles. Quote, "Maybe because there's a culture in LA of people coming here, not just living here. A lot of people who come to partake of their dreams," said Rick Carter, the production designer and art director known for his work on Jurassic Park and Avatar. Carter grew up in the film business. His father was a publicist for Jack Lemmon, and has seen the industry adapt from similar pressures from new technologies and shifting audience tastes. Quote, "If you take all those combustible elements, each one itself would be really tough," he said, of the current climate. Quote, "I don't know whether we'll be resilient enough to find a way to move forward." I don't know how you can move forward when you've got AI coming at you and you've got a Hollywood business that really doesn't care about people. They don't care about their audience. Hollywood is under tremendous stress because they're producing things that people don't want to see. They're just producing things that they want to push out as propaganda in so much of their content. And with all the competitive factors they're now facing, they're blowing up their own industry. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.